Welcome, dear subscribers and curious listeners of my channel. Although Voldemort is traditionally considered one of the most dangerous dark wizards in the world, strategic brilliance was never his strongest trait. Across 7 books, he made decisions that repeatedly led to his own failures. The Death Eaters, his closest allies, were hardly geniuses either. Many were regularly outsmarted by school children. But this story has its exceptions. Moments when the villains acted cleverly, unexpectedly, and truly outperformed the heroes. It's fascinating to recall them, and that is why today I've gathered the brightest examples of the dark side being actually smarter. Enjoy watching. Number 1. Pettigrew, the perfect mole. One of Voldemort's most successful and far-reaching moves was Peter Pettigrew. He didn't just betray his best friends, he staged his own death, framing Sirius Black. Thanks to his rat animagus form, he lived for years in the Weasley household, eating their food, listening, observing, and secretly providing Voldemort with valuable information. In many ways, Pettigrew demonstrated the level of cunning that even the Dark Lord himself often lacked. Number 2. The false vision for Harry. During the events of Order of the Phoenix, Voldemort realized he could weaponize his mental connection with Harry. He planted a believable but completely fake vision. Sirius supposedly captured and needing rescue. Harry rushed to the Ministry without verifying anything, and that decision cost Sirius his life, one of Voldemort's most precise and devastating strikes. Number 3. Isolating Harry through the media. One of the dark side's most sophisticated maneuvers wasn't even a magical attack, but an information war. The Ministry, actively denying Voldemort's return, turned Harry into a laughingstock, a delusional boy rambling nonsense about a dark wizard. Ironically, this helped Voldemort. He needed time to act from the shadows. Harry became cut off even from people he considered friends. The psychological blow was stronger than any spell. Number 4. Bathilda Bagshot. The Godric is Hollow Trap. When Harry and Hermione travelled to Godric's Hollow, the trap was already waiting for them, Nagini disguised inside Bathilda Bagshot's corpse. The friends had no way of knowing the real Bathilda had long been killed. What made it especially cunning was that Bathilda spoke to Harry alone. Hermione couldn't hear Parseltongue, and therefore couldn't sense that anything was wrong. The trap almost succeeded, and only Hermione's instant reaction saved them both. Number 5. Draco and the Vanishing Cabinet. In Half-Blood Prince, Draco Malfoy received a mission that determined his fate, to let the Death Eaters into Hogwarts. And he succeeded. He found a way to bypass all castle protections linking 2 vanishing cabinets and spent months repairing the system, persevering and hiding everything from the professors. Even Dumbledore never suspected the enemy had a direct passageway into the castle walls, one of the most successful covert operations in the entire series. Number 6. The Portkey disguised as the Triwizard Cup. When Harry and Cedric touched the cup in the maze, they were transported far from Hogwarts, straight into the hands of Wormtail and the not yet fully restored Voldemort. This plan is often criticized for being overly complicated, but its effectiveness can't be denied. It worked. If not for sheer luck and Voldemort's desire for a fair duel, Harry might not have returned alive. The very fact that the Dark Lord executed such a multi-stage trap is worth noting. Number 7. Yaxley sabotages the apparition. During the escape from the Ministry, Hermione was about to apparate with Harry and Ron when Yaxley managed to grab her arm at the last second. The result was disastrous. The apparition malfunctioned, Ron nearly died, and the trio ended up wandering the woods, wasting precious time and strength. It may not look like a stroke of genius, but its impact was massive. A split second of villainous precision nearly cost the trio everything. Number 8, Umbridge and the ban on magic. Dolores Umbridge didn't need a wand to weaken Hogwarts. She needed policies. Her first decree, no practical defense against the dark arts, spread through the school like a cold shadow. You will not under any circumstances attempt to perform spells in this class, she said, smiling as the students stared in disbelief. Harry felt the weight of it immediately. So did Hermione. Without practice, there was no preparation. Without preparation, there was no resistance. It was a quiet dismantling of the school as defences disguised as your proper ministry standards. Her power grew with every new decree. Teachers trembled, students whispered. She placed inquisitorial squad members at every corner, Draco Malfoy among them, watching for any sign of rebellion. When she threatened to expel Harry for speaking the truth, "You have been told that no such person as you know who is back," the entire castle felt the danger. Umbridge was not a Death Eater, but her obedience to the ministry hollowed Hogwarts from within, and for a time Voldemort could not have asked for a more useful ally. Number 9, the death of Alastor Moody. The flight from Privet Drive was meant to be flawless. 7 Potters, 7 decoys, a sky full of broomsticks and courage. But as soon as Hagrid lifted Harry into the air, green fire split the darkness. The Death Eaters were already waiting. Someone had betrayed the plan. "They knew it was tonight!" Kingsley shouted as curses rained from every direction. In the chaos, Mad-Eye Moody, Alastor the Unbreakable, took a killing curse straight to the chest. He fell from his broom without a sound. Moody's death was more than a loss. It was a message. Voldemort's spies had infiltrated the Order deeply enough to predict their most guarded movements. No duel could have killed the old aura so easily, but information could. A single whisper in the wrong ear turned the rescue mission into an ambush. The Death Eaters didn't need strategy, they needed knowledge, and someone had given it to them. When the survivors regrouped at the burrow, the silence was heavy. "Mad-Eye is dead," Bill finally said, his voice hollow. The news shattered what little hope remained. Suspicion spread through the Order like poison. Who had leaked the plan? Who could be trusted? Even without casting a single spell, Voldemort had wounded them. He had broken their unity. Moody's fall proved that fear and doubt were weapons as sharp as any curse, and the Dark Lord wielded them with precision. Number 10. Gringotts and the fake sword. The trio believed the gleaming blade in the vault was the true sword of Gryffindor. It felt heavy, solid, royal. Hermione even whispered, "We have it, Harry, we finally have it." But the truth was colder than goblin steel. Gringotts had already replaced the real sword with a perfect copy, forged to deceive anyone who dared to search for it. The goblins knew the sword absorbed basilisk venom. They knew it could destroy Horcruxes, and they ensured that no enemy of Voldemort would lay hands on the genuine weapon. Relying on the fake blade pushed the trio into real danger. Harry carried it like a promise. Ron planned around it. Hermione trusted it. But when they tried to use it, the lie became impossible to ignore. "It's useless," Ron muttered after one desperate attempt. The false sword was nothing more than a prop, a silent reminder that their enemies were still ahead. They had walked straight into a trap, built not with curses, but with craftsmanship and cunning. Only when the true sword materialized in their tent, summoned by Harry's courage in the icy depths of the forest, did the balance shift. The deception crumbled. The real blade sang with power, glittering with basilisk venom. Until that moment, however, the villains held the advantage. They had manipulated expectations, hidden the truth, and nearly forced the heroes into failure with a single, flawless counterfeit. Number 11, the Marauder's map used against Harry. Draco Malfoy watched Harry more carefully than Harry realized. He knew Potter trusted the Marauder's map as if it were a living ally. Every night Harry scanned its inked corridors, whispering, "I solemnly swear that I am up to no good." And every night Draco's name stayed stubbornly out of sight. Not because he was gone, but because he had found the one place the map could not reach, the room of requirement. It was the perfect blind spot, and Draco used it with precision. Inside that hidden chamber, Draco worked tirelessly on the vanishing cabinet. Broken wood, faded magic, a task far beyond his years. Yet every hour he spent there was protected by the map, silence. Hogwarts buzzed with rumours. Harry muttered to Ron, "I know he's up to something." But the map betrayed him. It showed nothing. Its brilliance became its weakness, and Draco turned that weakness into a shield. Whenever Draco moved through the castle, he did it like a ghost. Short steps, sudden turns, always slipping into the room of requirement before Harry could track him. It became a silent duel. Harry hunted shadows. Draco mended a weapon. The more Harry stared at the map, the more it deceived him. He saw the whole castle, yet missed the one place where danger grew every day. In the end, Draco's strategy worked. He finished the cabinet. The Death Eaters entered Hogwarts. And Harry, standing over the map one last time, realized too late that Draco had beaten him at his own game. The Marauder's map, created to expose secrets, had been outwitted by a boy who understood its limits. It was a quiet victory, but one that shifted the fate of the entire school. Number 12, Narcissa and the Lie About Harry, is death. Narcissa Malfoy walked through the silent ranks of Death Eaters as Voldemort lowered his wand. Harry lay motionless in the fallen leaves. No breath, no movement. The forest held its own heartbeat while everyone waited. Voldemort ordered her to check the body. She knelt beside Harry, leaned close, and whispered a question no one expected. "Is Draco alive?" Her voice trembled. Harry opened his eyes a fraction and breathed, "Yes." In that instant, everything changed. Narcissa did not hesitate. She stood, turned to Voldemort, and declared, "He is dead." The lie slid into the cold night like a blade. Voldemort believed her. The Death Eaters believed her. Even the forest seemed to believe her. It was the quietest betrayal in the entire war, and yet the most brilliant. Narcissa had no wand raised, no spell cast, only a mother, decision, and it outmaneuvered the Dark Lord himself. The march back to Hogwarts became a parade of false victory. Voldemort dragged Harry's limp body for all to see, shouting triumph. "Harry Potter is dead," he cried, and no one doubted him. Narcissa's lie held firm because no one imagined she would dare deceive the master she feared. But she did. She risked everything for a single truth. Her son was alive somewhere in the castle, and she needed to reach him. When Harry rose from Hagrid's arms moments later, the illusion shattered. Chaos erupted. The defenders of Hogwarts surged with hope. Voldemort stumbled, his entire strategy collapsing in seconds. Narcissa had tipped the scales without lifting a finger. She wasn't fighting for good or evil. She was fighting for Draco. But her lie shaped the final battle more sharply than any curse that night. Number 13, Lucius Malfoy and Riddle-E's Diary. Lucius Malfoy played his game in shadows. No duel, no curse, only a quiet gesture in a crowded shop. In Chamber of Secrets, he slipped Tom Riddle's diary into Ginny Weasley's cauldron with a smooth, practiced motion. J.K. Rowling describes it simply: Malfoy's hand shot out, and something small and black fell into Ginny's cauldron. It looked accidental, ordinary, but it was the moment that set the entire school on the edge of disaster. Lucius had motives of his own. He wanted Arthur Weasley disgraced. He wanted Dumbledore weakened. He wanted fear back in the air. The diary was his weapon. He did not know it held a fragment of Voldemort's soul, but he sensed its power, its promise. Using Ginny was perfect. A vulnerable girl, a family Malfoy despised. And when the attacks began, he smiled behind his cane. The Ministry blamed Hagrid. Parents pulled students out. Dumbledore was forced to leave the castle. Meanwhile, the diary worked patiently through Ginny. It fed on her fears. It whispered to her at night. It wrote back in curling black ink as if it were a trusted friend. Through her hands, the chamber opened again. Harry remembers the moment he confronted the truth. Ginny poured her soul into me. I grew stronger. Tom Riddle's memory stood before him, no longer just ink, but nearly alive. And every step of this revival began with Lucius Malfoy, silent decision in flourish and blots. For a time, Lucius won. Chaos ruled the school. The Weasleys suffered. Dumbledore was gone. Hogwarts trembled before a threat no one could see. All because one man dropped a diary into a child's cauldron as casually as a piece of trash. It was elegant, cold, and devastating. Even without knowing the diary was a Horcrux, Lucius Malfoy proved how much damage a single calculated act could unleash. Number 14, Slughorn and the Tampered Memory. Horace Slughorn was known for charm, parties, and connections. But in Half-Blood Prince, he proved he could be far more dangerous than he appeared. When Harry asked him about his old student Tom Riddle, Slughorn panicked. He knew exactly what the boy had once asked: how does one split the soul? That conversation haunted him for decades. To protect his reputation, Slughorn tampered with the memory itself, twisting it into a harmless scene that revealed nothing. The result looked real, smooth, polished, a perfect lie caught in a bottle. Dumbledore immediately recognized the forgery. Harry did not. The headmaster warned him gently, "This memory has been tampered with, but the truth exists, Harry. We need it." Without those missing details, the hunt for Horcruxes was blind. Voldemort's greatest secret, the key to defeating him, was locked behind one frightened professor: guilt. Slughorn was not acting out of malice, but his fear served the Dark Lord better than any curse. Harry spent weeks trying to break through Slughorn's defenses. The old man avoided him at every turn. He changed topics. He faked sleep. He even hid behind his own students. Each evasion bought Voldemort more time. Hogwarts felt calm on the surface, yet this quiet sabotage was far more dangerous than any duel. It stopped the truth itself. Harry felt it constantly. The real memory was close, but sealed behind a door only Slughorn could open. The breakthrough came on a tense night in the Gryffindor common room. Harry gave Slughorn a truth he could not escape: Lily Potter's courage, her sacrifice. and the shame Slughorn carried for helping the boy who became a monster. The professor broke. He whispered, "I am ashamed. I am ashamed of what I have done." Then the real memory swirled into view. Tom Riddle leaning forward, voice smooth as glass, asking about Horcruxes with cold curiosity. In that moment, Slughorn's secret finally collapsed, and the path to Voldemort's destruction became clear again. Number 15, the Lestrange Vault and the trap at the bank. The break-in at Gringotts was remembered as the moment when heroes risked everything. But beneath the spectacle of disguises and dragonfire, there existed a quieter, far more unsettling truth. The villains had been waiting. Every step Harry Potter, Hermione Granger, and Ron Weasley believed they controlled was in reality monitored, anticipated, and nearly crushed under the weight of a trap set long before they knew they would walk into it. The Lestrange family, with Bellatrix as its ruthless matriarch, had woven a web of paranoia and cruelty so dense that even the ancient Goblin Bank bowed under its pressure. What looked like chaos was closer to a masterpiece of villainous preparation. Bellatrix Lestrange had always treated her vault as a shrine, a sanctuary for the Dark Lord, secrets as much as for her own obsessions. When she learned that the sword of Gryffindor, something she believed still lay untouched within her vault, had been seen in the hands of enemies, her mind ignited with a fear she did not bother to conceal. If the goblins have been deceitful, if they have allowed my treasure to be tampered with, she raged, radiating a panic Voldemort rarely inspired in her. This fear birthed a frenzy. She stormed back to Gringotts, issued threats, and forced the goblins into an alliance of terror. From that moment, the vault became more than protected, it became weaponized. By the time the trio entered Gringotts under the guise of Polyjuice Potion, the bank itself had transformed into a living trap. Every guard, every enchanted chain, every dragon-controlled gate acted like a sentry in a fortress built specifically for Bellatrix paranoia. Hermione played her part well, limping in Bellatrix boots and carrying her wand with a trembling bravado. It was convincing, perhaps even brilliant, yet the truth was that illusion had no chance against a plan engineered by the very woman whose face she was wearing. The Lestrange matriarch anticipated that anyone impersonating her would be met with suspicion, and the goblins, driven by fear of her retribution, responded with brutal vigilance. The goblin Griphook sensed the tension long before the others did. His voice may not appear in the memories that followed, but the agitation in his actions told the full story. The goblins were not merely suspicious, they were prepared. They had rehearsed exactly what to do if Bellatrix, a vault, was targeted, and their protocol was not the polite, bureaucratic refusal the trio expected. It was a chain reaction of alarms, enchanted metal clattering in the shadows, and vault guardians waking like ancient beasts. No polyjuice could hide the truth from eyes sharpened by terror. Inside the tunnels, the atmosphere shifted as if the air itself grew taut. Rods of cold metal vibrated with enchantments older than the Ministry. The clanking of the railway cart echoed like a countdown. Harry sensed it too. The further they travelled, the more he felt they were entering territory where no disguise, no charm, and no borrowed authority would save them. Hermione's imitation of Bellatrix began to falter, not because her acting failed, but because the system was designed to break imposters. The villains had accounted for human error. The heroes had not accounted for villainous foresight. When they reached the thief, its downfall, the first invisible blade struck. The waterfall was not simply a protective charm, it was a revelation machine crafted for the precise purpose of destroying lies. Bellatrix had demanded assurances that no illusion, no enchantment, and no transfigured intruder could slip into her vault unnoticed. Her fury had forged this defense. As the icy water crashed over the cart, Hermione's polyjuice disguise melted away, and all three were left raw, exposed, dripping with the weight of their broken cover. The cart was falling, and Hermione's shriek of horror echoed off the walls, the book recalls, capturing the moment the villains' preparations began to crush the heroes' chances of success. Once inside the vault, the trio found themselves not in a chamber of treasure, but in a tomb of curses. The Lestranges had crafted their protections with a venom that mirrored their cruelty. Every object multiplied at the slightest touch, swelling like molten metal, threatening to bury intruders alive. It was no coincidence that such a curse guarded the cup of Helga Hufflepuff. Voldemort entrusted this Horcrux to Bellatrix not because of loyalty alone, but because she understood fear better than most. Her vault was an extension of her soul, unpredictable, oppressive, vicious. The multiplying treasure was a trap designed not to be escaped. Each duplicated goblet or dish grew hotter, sharper, more suffocating, creating a storm of self-replication that threatened to swallow the trio beneath its avalanche. Even Ron, whose courage rarely faltered, felt panic claw at his throat as the cursed treasure piled higher. The villains had devised a simple, brilliant strategy. Any thief who reached the vault would be defeated by their own greed. Even touching the wrong object could mean suffocation beneath an ever-expanding mountain of gold. What made the trap so effective was the villains' understanding of psychology. Bellatrix's trust in Voldemort did not blind her to the dangers of others seeking what she protected. She knew an intruder would be desperate, rushed, and vulnerable. The curse targeted exactly those weaknesses. It was a silent accusation. You want what is not yours, therefore you will drown in your desire. In another life, it might have been poetic. In this one, it was lethal. Yet even as the walls seemed to close in, Harry's sight pierced through the madness. The cup gleamed in the chaos, radiating an aura that made his scar prickle. He lunged, reaching through the scalding metal, his hand closing around a piece of Voldemort's fractured soul. The pain was immediate. The heat scorched him, blisters rising across his skin. But this was the moment the villains feared, the second their trap failed even for an instant. And fear is what triggered the final stage of Bellatrix's mechanism, the alarm that echoed through the tunnels of Gringotts like a death knell. Number 16, Voldemort's resurrection ritual. The night Voldemort returned was not a spontaneous eruption of darkness, but the culmination of a design so intricate that even the keenest minds of the Order failed to notice the shape it was taking. Wormtail Peter Pettigrew, the man dismissed as a coward and a traitor without ambition, proved in that moment to be far more dangerous in his desperation than any Death Eater driven by ideology. His planning was not brilliant in the traditional sense. Instead, it was marked by a rat-like patience, a quiet scurrying beneath the floorboards of the wizarding world. While the heroes celebrated temporary peace, he moved unseen, gathering the final threads for a ritual many considered impossible. What occurred in that graveyard was not merely the resurrection of a dark wizard, but a triumph of villainous foresight over heroic expectation. For years, Voldemort existed as a wraith, clinging to life by the fragments of his soul scattered across Horcruxes. Yet even in that diminished form, he whispered instructions to his most loyal servant. Pettigrew, his escape in The Prisoner of Azkaban, was not a simple flight from justice. It was the opening act of the ritual. The moment he slipped from Sirius Black's grasp in his animagus form, the balance of power shifted. The world thought it had lost a pathetic traitor, but in truth it had released the architect of a resurgence. As Voldemort would later admit, I was less than spirit, less than the meanest ghost, but I was alive. That fragile spark of life was enough for Pettigrew to nurture. The ingredients of the ritual were never random. Voldemort himself described the magic as old, very old, the kind of magic no wizard of this age understands. Pettigrew spent months piecing together these ancient requirements. The bone of the father had to be taken without permission, pulled from the grave of Tom Riddle Sr. The flesh of the servant was to be offered willingly, an act proving absolute loyalty, and the blood of the enemy had to be drawn, not stolen, representing a symbolic triumph over the prophecy itself. In using Harry as blood, Voldemort believed he was defeating the very protection that had once reduced him to a wraith. The graveyard in Little Hangleton was chosen with chilling precision. It was the birthplace of Voldemort's mortal identity, the final resting place of the father he despised, and a place untouched by protective enchantments. Pettigrew knew the terrain, the timing, and the vulnerability of the Triwizard Tournament as portkey system. He didn't simply bring Harry randomly, he delivered him at the exact moment the magical barriers around Hogwarts would be weakest. In this sense, the villains didn't simply outwit the heroes. They exploited the very traditions and rituals of the magical world. It is easy to forget how thoroughly heroes were misled before that night. Albus Dumbledore, with all his wisdom, underestimated Pettigrew's cunning. The Ministry dismissed the danger entirely, too busy celebrating what they believed was a peaceful era. Even Mad-Eye Moody, the most paranoid wizard alive, was replaced by Barty Crouch Jr. under the Imperious Curse, a substitution executed so seamlessly that no one suspected the infiltration. Every step, every substitution, every stolen moment of trust was funneled toward that graveyard, where Voldemort's body awaited its rebirth. When the ritual began, it was not a chaotic burst of curses, but a deliberate sequence of symbolic acts. Pettigrew's trembling hand scooped bone from the grave as Voldemort's high, cold voice whispered, "Bone of the father, unwillingly given." In that moment, the spell tethered the Dark Lord to his lineage in the most twisted form of inheritance imaginable. It was both a literal and symbolic rejection of mortal weakness. Heroes pride themselves on loyalty and love, yet Voldemort's ritual began with a violation of ancestry, a testament to his belief that he had transcended human ties. The next step showcased Pettigrew's horrifying devotion. Flesh of the servant willingly given. Pettigrew's self-mutilation was not an act of courage but of terror-bound loyalty, proving that villainy often demands sacrifices just as grand as heroism. The severed hand fell into the cauldron, turning the water viscous and silver. It was the moment where the ritual shifted from symbolic to corporeal. This sacrifice demonstrated that even the weakest villain could alter the course of history through a single dreadful choice. But the most important ingredient was the one Voldemort valued most, Harry's blood. Blood of the enemy. Forcibly taken. Pettigrew sliced Harry's arm with casual cruelty, the red droplets hitting the cauldron like sparks falling onto dry tinder. Voldemort believed the choice of Harry's blood solved his greatest flaw. Lily Potter's sacrificial protection had burned him once now. By binding that same blood into his own resurrection, he thought he had stolen the very force that once shielded the boy. He wanted not just to return, but to emerge beyond the reach of love's ancient magic. The moment Voldemort rose from the cauldron is perhaps the most harrowing example of villains seizing the narrative. He stepped forth, pale as bone, eyes glowing red, triumphant. His first breaths in the new body were calculated and slow, tasting victory. He examined his hands with a clinical precision, whispering, "How am I alive?" not in confusion but in amazement at the success of the ritual he had designed decades earlier. Pettigrew's labor, Barty Crouch Jr. as infiltration, and Harry as unwitting participation had all led to this moment. For the first time since the prophecy had been spoken, Voldemort felt invincible. Number 17, the occupation of the Ministry. The takeover of the Ministry of Magic remains one of the most unsettling turning points in the wizarding world's recent history. A moment when evil triumphed not with brute force, but with quiet precision. The Death Eaters understood that open war produces martyrs, resistance, and noise. Subtlety, however, corrodes the foundations of a society long before the majority realizes anything is wrong. The fall of the Ministry illustrates the cold brilliance of Voldemort's strategy, for he recognized that the fastest route to domination was not the battlefield, but the bureaucracy, where laws could be twisted faster than wands could be raised. The first fissure appeared with the imperiousist Pius Thicknesser, whose position as head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement made him an ideal puppet. Under normal circumstances, Thickness was a rigid, by-the-book official, respected for his composure. Yet, according to the eyewitness descriptions preserved in later testimonies, his behavior changed almost overnight. It was subtle at first, a stiffness in his walk, a dullness in his eyes. As Rowling wrote, Thickness was acting as though something invisible were tugging him forward. The Death Eaters did not need him to shout Voldemort's will from the rafters. They merely needed a silent conduit. A single key figure, compromised in the right place, was enough to begin rotting the entire institution from within. What makes this event especially chilling is how quickly the contamination spread. Imperius is not a spell that announces itself. It is a hijacking of willpower, replacing a person, thoughts with the caster's intent. When the Daily Prophet reported that Thickness had been promoted to minister after Scrimgeour's death, many believed it was a normal political transition during wartime. Only those close to the core realized that the new minister never wrote his own speeches, never questioned orders, and never attempted negotiation. The Ministry was no longer neutral ground, but a stage set for Voldemort's plans, lit by new laws that favoured fear over justice. The speed with which the Ministry transformed its judicial system is one of the strongest examples of how villains outmaneuvered the heroes. Within days, new propaganda campaigns painted Muggleborns as frauds, stealing magic from true wizards. This rhetoric, echoing through official memos, led to the creation of the Muggleborn Registration Commission. The chair of that commission, Dolores Umbridge, seized her newfound authority with the glee of someone who had always believed herself destined to rise. Her courtroom became a mechanism for humiliation. Rowling described it with chilling clarity. Umbridge's voice was high and cold as she read the charges, and the chains on the chair rattled as the accused trembled. Victims were not just prosecuted, they were publicly erased. What elevates this moment into one of the villain's most strategic victories is the silence it enforced. The Ministry's takeover was not an explosion, but a suffocation. Witches and wizards who disagreed found themselves watched, followed, questioned. Many simply kept their heads down, believing compliance equaled survival. Voldemort understood human nature painfully well. Terror creates obedience, but invisible terror creates complicity. It is far easier to condemn a dark mark cast into the sky than to recognize corruption disguised as law. By the time Harry, Ron, and Hermione realized the Ministry was under complete Death Eater control, they faced a fortress that no longer required walls. The institution itself had become Voldemort's shield. Every wand license, every patrol schedule, every enchanted elevator reported back to those who served him. Even the Ministry, as architecture, felt different. The golden statues depicting wizarding benevolence, once symbolizing unity, were replaced by a brutal sculpture of witches and wizards crushing muggles beneath them. In Deathly Hallows, the narration strikes hard. A gigantic statue of black stone dominated the entire hall. The magic beneath the stone figures transformed the muggles, struggling to an eternal stillness. It was propaganda carved in granite. In analyzing the villain's victory, one must acknowledge how the heroes were blindsided not by power, but by timing. The Order of the Phoenix, dedicated as it was, lacked numbers and formal authority. Their surveillance was scattered, their communication limited, their response always a step behind. Voldemort's forces infiltrated at the precise moment the Order expected open conflict. Instead of storming the Ministry, the Death Eaters walked through its doors wearing the faces of its own officials. The brilliance of this maneuver was that it left no battle to recount, no casualties to rally around, no event to mark the moment democracy died. One of the most tragic consequences of the Ministry's fall was the psychological effect it produced. People believed, at least briefly, that the new order was simply the product of wartime necessity. Fear makes gradual change harder to resist. Harry's own infiltration of the Ministry later confirms how thoroughly this new ideology had been accepted. Workers moved past posters of mudbloods and the danger they pose as though they were reading standard safety guidelines. There is a line in the book that captures this dreadful normalization. No one looked twice at Harry and Hermione as they passed. Terror had conditioned them to silence. Silence in this world became Voldemort's greatest triumph. The takeover becomes even more compelling when examining the way Voldemort weaponized bureaucracy itself. The trace on underage wizards became a tool to monitor the movements of those who fled. The Flu network was monitored, the improper use of Magic Office repurposed as an intelligence arm, and the werewolf registry cross-referenced to pressure those vulnerable to manipulation. Layer by layer, the Ministry or its departments were reshaped into tools for oppression. Heroes are used to fighting curses, not paperwork that can ruin a life with a stamp and a signature. Voldemort understood this better than anyone. Number 18, the trap at the Lovegood's house. The moment Harry, Ron, and Hermione arrived at the crooked home of Xenophilius Lovegood, the atmosphere carried an almost unnatural stillness, a deceptive calm that masked the true depth of the danger awaiting them inside. They had come seeking answers, seeking direction, hoping that the eccentric editor of the Quibbler could illuminate the truth about the Deathly Hallows. What they did not know, but would soon painfully discover, was that Voldemort's influence had already seeped into this isolated home like a silent poison. The man who once stood as an ally in spirit had been crushed by the most universal of vulnerabilities, the love a father bears for his child. It was Luna Lovegood's absence that first unsettled Hermione. A home usually brimming with Luna's presence, her sketches, her odd collections, her serene, floaty energy, felt hollowed out, disturbingly incomplete. Harry remembered the eerie silence as Hermione's eyes scanned the room, noting the missing boots by the door, the cold teacup, the bare hook where Luna's cloak usually hung. Hermione, instincts were rarely wrong, and here they whispered of danger long before Xenophilius revealed the truth. But the trio, exhausted and desperate for guidance, allowed themselves to believe the father's trembling excuses. They needed what he claimed to know, and the hope of answers pushed them deeper into the trap. What Voldemort had orchestrated was more than a simple snare. It was a demonstration of cruelty calculated with chilling precision. By abducting Luna, gentle, kind, loyal Luna, he had weaponized innocence itself. Luna had never fought him, never threatened his rise to power. Yet Voldemort understood that striking at the hearts of those associated with Harry would yield emotional wounds far more devastating than any hex. Xenophilius, once quirky and fearless, became a man unraveling at the seams, held together only by the hope of his daughter's return. As the book recounts with brutal frankness, Luna is at the mercy of the Death Eaters. They will kill her if I do not cooperate. This confession revealed the full scope of Voldemort's new strategy. He no longer targeted only rebels. He targeted their families, their stability, their emotional anchors. When Xenophilius sent out the call for the Death Eaters, he acted with the shaking resolve of a man who knew he was betraying not only the resistance, but his own moral core. His movements were frantic, his voice strained, yet every small gesture carried the weight of desperation. Harry watched him closely and later recalled that moment as one of the rare times he truly understood how Voldemort broke people without ever casting a curse. The father's betrayal was not born of malice, but of terror. It was proof that Voldemort had evolved from a tyrant who relied on force into a manipulator who preyed upon the deepest human fears. The Lovegood house itself became a character in this unfolding danger, transforming from a whimsical sanctuary into a treacherous maze. Its uneven floors and spiraling staircase, once charming eccentricities, now seemed like barriers blocking any clean escape. The printing press rumbled in the corner like an uneasy heartbeat, stamping out issue after issue of the Quibbler, each one proof of Xenophilius' former defiance. The trio soon realized that the very space meant to harbor truth had been twisted into a lure. The irony was bitter. The home of a man who had spent years publishing unconventional ideas now became the stage of one of Voldemort's most cunning manipulations. As the Death Eaters closed in, the atmosphere changed from tense to suffocating. The windows shook from the force of their arrival, and the air seemed to shrink, tightening with the inevitability of confrontation. Ron gripped his wand with white-knuckled fear, while Hermione's mind raced through escape strategies. Harry, feeling the familiar pressure of responsibility, understood that this was a moment where one wrong move could cost them not only their mission, but their lives. The sense of doom was heightened when Xenophilius broke down completely, his voice cracking as he admitted, I had to. They have my Luna. It was not an excuse. It was a confession carved out of guilt. The trio never expected to be betrayed by someone aligned with the side of good. That was the psychological blow that Voldemort delivered with precise cruelty. He had forced a good man to commit an act of treachery, proving that loyalty could be shattered, not through ideology, but through fear. The resistance, already fractured and hunted, now faced a terrifying reality. Even allies could become unwilling threats. Hermione later reflected that this moment was one of the darkest in their journey because it revealed vulnerability far deeper than physical danger. It exposed the fragility of trust. When the Death Eaters stormed the house, the space erupted into chaos. Spells tore through walls, shattering furniture and ripping apart prints of fantastical creatures that once decorated the home. Dust clouded the air as beams cracked, and every movement felt like navigating a collapsing world. The Death Eaters fought with ruthless precision, their presence cold and merciless. Harry recognized Selwyn's voice among them, and the realization that Voldemort's forces had arrived so quickly meant that the betrayal had been expected, even anticipated. The trio was not only outnumbered, they were outmaneuvered. Hermione's quick thinking became the razor-thin line between survival and defeat. Despite the tremors running through her hands and the panic tightening her chest, she acted with fierce clarity. She knew that brute strength could not save them, and she leaned into what she did best, strategic magic. As the book recounts in Harry, is memory. Hermione was already on her feet, wand raised, shouting an incantation that shook the foundations. Her spell was not crafted to win, it was crafted to escape. In a moment where every second mattered, she used her brilliance to turn the collapsing tower into a diversion. The explosion that ripped through the Lovegood home was both literal and symbolic. It shattered the fragile illusion of sanctuary and forced the trio into the open, relying on instinct and trust in each other. As they dissipated into the cold winter air, the sound of falling stone echoed behind them, the remnants of a place that had held both hope and betrayal. The near collapse of the tower marked not only their escape, but the irreversible truth that Voldemort's reach extended into every corner of their world. What lingered afterward was not relief, but unease. The trio realized that this encounter marked a turning point. Voldemort had begun weaponizing the emotional ties that bound good people together. He no longer relied solely on fear of punishment, he relied on fear of loss. Luna Lovegood's kidnapping was not merely a tactic, it was a message delivered through the suffering of a gentle girl whose only crime was loyalty. This was psychological warfare of the darkest kind, designed to unsettle, destabilize, and erode the resistance from within. Harry, who had known loss all his life, felt this blow particularly deeply. Seeing how Voldemort exploited the love between a parent and a child awakened a new kind of fury in him. It reminded him of his own parents' sacrifice, of Sirius' compassion, of the thread of love that Voldemort always underestimated yet sought to corrupt. Harry understood now that Voldemort was not only attacking bodies, he was attacking bonds. The harm dealt to the Lovegoods echoed through Harry's conscience long after they fled the collapsing tower. Ron, too, felt the weight of this encounter. He had always relied on the comforting assumption that the world could be divided into allies and enemies, but the Lovegood betrayal shattered that certainty. It forced him to confront the reality that anyone could be turned under enough pressure. His anger at Xenophilius softened only when Hermione reminded him that fear twists even good people beyond recognition. Ron realized then that the war was no longer only about defeating Death Eaters, it was about protecting the fragile humanity that Voldemort attempted to crush. Hermione carried the heaviest burden of all, the knowledge that her magic had saved them but could not save Xenophilius from his fate. She replayed the scene in her mind, haunted by the sight of the father pleading for his child's life. Her understanding of Voldemort deepened into something colder and sharper. She recognized that he was no longer simply a Dark Lord chasing power. He had become a strategist of emotional destruction. Hermione saw clearly that this tactic would spread terror through the resistance more effectively than any curse. The trap at the Lovegood home stands as a chilling testament to Voldemort's evolving strategy. By forcing good people to commit acts of desperation, he fractured the moral landscape of the wizarding world. His manipulation of Xenophilius revealed that no one, not journalists, not students, not parents, was beyond his reach. The trio's narrow escape served as both a warning and a lesson. The war they fought was no longer about physical battles alone, but about preserving trust, hope, and loyalty in a world where Voldemort sought to corrupt them all. Number 19. Professor Quirrell and the Chess Game in the Shadows. Professor Quirrell's timid stutter was a mask so perfectly tailored that even the keenest minds at Hogwarts overlooked it. Beneath the nervous smiles and the smell of garlic on his turban, something far more sinister lived, a consciousness whispering to him in the quietest halls of the castle. What seemed like just another eccentric Hogwarts professor turned out to be the vessel of Lord Voldemort, a truth so outrageous that even Albus Dumbledore initially underestimated its implications. The most terrifying part was how close Quirrell stood to Harry Potter every day, within feet, often within inches, while carrying the darkest wizard of the age beneath layers of deception. Quirrell's presence became the first lesson Harry ever received in understanding the cunning of Voldemort. The Dark Lord did not simply use force, he used proximity, psychology, and careful planning. Harry had expected that evil would arrive with roaring flames, unmistakable malice, and declarations of power. Instead, Voldemort arrived hidden in the body of a man who pretended to drop his quills, shake during meals, and offer excuses whenever danger appeared. The contrast between appearance and truth formed one of the most unsettling aspects of Harry's first year. It also shaped his understanding of how deeply manipulation could run within the wizarding world. It was Quirrell who released the mountain troll into Hogwarts on Halloween night. The event had long been interpreted as chaos, a random act of malice, yet it was strategic. In Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, the text makes clear that Quirrell must have let it in, a detail Hermione herself deduced. This single moment demonstrated Voldemort's willingness to weaponize confusion. While teachers scrambled and students panicked, Quirrell slipped away unnoticed, moving toward the third-floor corridor where the stone was hidden. But this act had a second purpose. It allowed him to assess Harry more closely. Voldemort wanted to know whether the boy who lived still carried the mysterious protective power of his mother's sacrifice. Quirrell's later admission, "I wondered whether I would be able to touch you," reveals the chilling intention woven into the event. Even after this first attack, Quirrell maintained his masquerade flawlessly. He continued to sit quietly during meals, offering awkward smiles, while the other professors discussed the incident with concern. Harry, Ron, and Hermione themselves failed to see him as a viable suspect. They suspected Snape, who loomed and glared. They suspected Filch, who growled and chased students from corridors. They even suspected Hagrid at one point. But they never looked closely at the professor, who seemed physically the weakest, socially the smallest, and magically the most nervous. This was Voldemort's strategy: hide inside insignificance. Yet the chessboard beneath the school secrets made Quirrell's actions even more striking. When Harry and his friends ultimately decided to go through the protective enchantments to stop the theft of the stone, they faced a series of magical challenges designed by the Hogwarts professors. And one of the most overlooked ironies is that the enchantment that required the most strategic clarity, the massive enchanted wizard's chess set, proved to be the most aligned thematically with Quirrell's own approach. The chessboard was a landscape of hidden threats, sacrifices, and unexpected reversals. Ron recognized this immediately, whispering that they were in the game, and the placement of the pieces seemed like an echo of the invisible game already unfolding above, where Quirrell had been outmaneuvering the staff for months. As Ron Weasley took command of the board, his strategy mirrored the very cunning Quirrell had used against them. He played quietly at first, observing positions, studying movements, waiting for openings. Ron's bold sacrifice, allowing himself to be struck so Harry could advance, symbolized the opposite of Quirrell's philosophy. Voldemort used people as pawns to serve himself, discarding them without hesitation. Ron used himself as a pawn to protect his friends. The moment when Ron shouted his final instruction to Harry and then fell under the blow of the Queen stands as one of the clearest moral contrasts between the heroes and the villains. The chess match, though designed by Professor McGonagall, became an ideological reflection of the psychological warfare Voldemort waged that year. While the young trio navigated these dangers, Quirrell was unraveling under Voldemort's dominance. In those final chambers, Harry saw the truth. The man who trembled with fear in the Great Hall could stand effortlessly in a room filled with flames, his voice steady and his face calm as he explained the events of the year. His words, calm, assured, and venomous, revealed a man who had been living a double existence. He admitted to cursing Harry's broom during the Quidditch match, an act nearly successful despite Snape countercurse. Harry's near fall from the sky had not been luck, nor an accident. It had been a calculated attempt disguised behind chaos and shouting. The boy had believed Snape to be the threat, but the true danger was standing feet away, whispering curses while pretending to be helpless. Quirrell. His confidence in these moments exposed the manipulative nature Voldemort had cultivated in him. He described the ease with which he had fooled the staff, explaining that he could come and go as he pleased because no one suspected him. Dumbledore, often credited with insight bordering on prophetic, had initially overlooked the deep extent of Voldemort's influence. Quirrell, his duplicity had succeeded even against Hogwarts' greatest defenders. It was only after Harry's encounter with the Mirror of Erist that the truth could no longer be hidden. The stone recognized Harry as pure intentions, while Quirrell and Voldemort were blinded by greed. The mirror scene stands as the emotional center of the year. Harry felt his scar burn and heard the cold, disembodied voice of Voldemort urging Quirrell to seize the stone. In the book, the voice hissed, "Use the boy, use him," a moment that crystallized the full horror of Voldemort's manipulation. The Dark Lord not only hid within Quirrell, but also attempted to use Harry's own desires as a weapon against him. That Harry resisted this lure, despite the temptation of seeing his parents again, demonstrates the depth of the moral testing he endured. Voldemort did not simply threaten him physically, he attempted to corrupt him spiritually. The struggle that followed when Quirrell tried to seize Harry by force revealed a second layer of the confrontation. The protection Harry carried, Lily Potter, his sacrificial magic, burned Quirrell's skin, causing the professor to recoil in agony. Voldemort, unable to possess Harry due to this ancient magic, abandoned Quirrell in desperation. The professor's voice faltered, his disguise shattered, his body ravaged by the conflict between his master's power and Harry's innate protection. When he collapsed, Harry realized that his enemy had never been the stumbling, mumbling professor, but the invisible shadow riding within him. Although Harry prevailed, the year demonstrated the brilliance of Voldemort's early strategies. He used a host disguised as a weakling. He orchestrated diversions that felt like random disasters. He manipulated assumptions, exploiting the natural inclination to suspect threat in the powerful rather than the meek. Voldemort's control over Quirrell showcased a level of psychological warfare Harry had never seen before. It would take years for him to fully grasp how deeply manipulation factored into Voldemort's power, but the first hints were sown here, in the shadows, in the castle corridors, in the false stutters and trembling hands. Harry, reflecting on the events later in life, might have recognized that this early encounter was one of the most important he ever faced. It taught him that evil does not always reveal itself in flashy gestures or overt violence. Sometimes it hides behind timid smiles. Sometimes it whispers instead of shouts. Sometimes it wins battles without anyone noticing they were fought. This understanding became vital in his later struggles, especially when Voldemort returned with a body of his own and the world refused to believe Harry's warnings. Quirrell had been the rehearsal for a larger war. In the aftermath, even Dumbledore privately acknowledged the danger of the deception. His conversation with Harry about love being the protection Voldemort could not understand hinted at a broader truth. Voldemort consistently underestimated the emotional bonds that shielded Harry. Quirrell, possessed by a master of strategy, had used everything except the one force Voldemort refused to acknowledge. The brilliance of the Dark Lord's manipulations was also his downfall. He lacked the emotional intelligence to predict the outcome of touching a boy protected by love. The chessboard becomes the perfect metaphor for that year. Quirrell believed himself to be the queen, dangerous, mobile, destructive. Voldemort believed himself to be the king, controlling the board from the shadows. But Harry and his friends did not play by the same rules. They were willing to sacrifice, willing to break conventional strategies, willing to move forward even when the path seemed impossible. Ron's fall, Hermione's logic in the potion puzzle, and Harry's courage in facing Quirrell alone formed a tapestry of resistance that Voldemort simply could not anticipate. Even now, revisiting these events through a historian or editor's lens reveals the depth of that deception. Quirrell's smile, stutter, and sweat-covered brow were not signs of cowardice. They were part of a mask crafted under Voldemort's direction. The mountain troll, the broom curse, the attempts to steal the stone, and the manipulation of the staff all point to a level of cunning that deserved far more attention. The first year at Hogwarts was not merely an adventure, it was a silent battleground where a disguised villain nearly outmaneuvered the greatest protectors of the magical world. And as Harry stood over Quirrell's fallen form, the smell of burning flesh still in the chamber, he realized the truth. Evil had not approached him roaring, but whispering. It had tried to lull him into false security. It had tested him with illusions, shadows, and lies. Voldemort's first attack on Harry was not a duel, it was a deception, and it was only the beginning. Number 20, Mundungus Fletcher, as betrayal. Few moments in the Harry Potter saga illustrate the razor-thin boundary between loyalty and betrayal as vividly as the fall of Mundungus Fletcher. The Order of the Phoenix, bruised and scattered after Dumbledore's death, depended on trust more than ever. Yet trust itself became the weak link, slipping silently through the cracks in the shape of a petty thief whose cowardice would cost lives. What unfolded around the operation known as the Seven Potters was not merely an ambush, it was a masterclass in how Voldemort could weaponize fear, vulnerability, and human weakness to outmaneuver even the bravest of heroes. Mundungus Fletcher had never been a man of principle. His pockets were always full of dubious goods, and his stories were stitched from half-truths and evasions. Still, Dumbledore believed there was usefulness in keeping him close, for even untrustworthy men sometimes carried valuable information. After Dumbledore's death, however, the fragile restraints that held Mundungus loosely to the Order collapsed. When the Ministry fell and Voldemort's shadow lengthened, Mundungus found himself cornered. As Harry later realized, Voldemort had no need to torture a man like Fletcher for information. All he had to do was scare him. And fear had always been Mundungus's deepest language. The Dark Lord sensed it instantly and extracted from him the details of the escape plan, a betrayal that would shape the darkest summer of Harry's life. When the Order gathered at Privet Drive to disguise themselves as duplicates of Harry, none of them suspected that the enemy was already waiting in the sky. The plan had been discussed in whispers, known only to a tight circle. Harry himself hated the idea, yet it was considered safe, clever, nearly foolproof. "It's the only way," Mad-Eye Moody had insisted, glaring at Mundungus when he started protesting. That glare, full of suspicion, now feels eerily prophetic in hindsight. For as the 7 versions of Harry lifted off from the ground, some on broomsticks, others on thestrals or in sidecars, the trap had already been set. The ambush struck with devastating precision. Harry later remembered the moment the sky erupted with curses, green flashes slicing through darkness. The sheer number of Death Eaters exposed a horrifying truth. They had not merely guessed the night of the escape, they knew the exact hour, the exact route, and the exact setup. Among the screams and the roar of broomsticks, Harry glimpsed Voldemort himself soaring without a broom, his face pale and inhuman in the furious lightning. This was no coincidence. This was strategy. Voldemort had learned patience since his defeat at the Ministry. He waited for the perfect moment to strike, and he had discovered it through the weakest link in the Order. In the chaos that followed, the bravest paid the highest price. Mad-Eye Moody, the veteran Auror who had hunted dark wizards for decades, fell in the very first assault. The legend who had survived countless duels could not survive one traitor. The Order later recovered only fragments of the truth. Hagrid saw a flash, an explosion, and then nothing. Mad-Eye vanished into the stormy night, taking with him one of the Order's greatest shields. Voldemort had not just killed a warrior, he dismantled a symbol of resistance. Mundungus' betrayal, born from fear, had left a hole the size of a hero. But the tragedy did not end with Moody. Fred and George Weasley, inseparable even in battle, found themselves under a rain of curses as they attempted to protect their designated Harry. The screams, the wind, the flashes of light, everything blurred into one frantic struggle. In that blinding moment, a curse tore across the chaos and struck George. Later, Harry remembered the shock that cut through the burrow when he saw George lying on the bed, pale and bleeding. "I think," George whispered faintly, "I am holy." The joke was brave, but the wound was real. A cursed Sectum Sempra spell had sliced off his ear. It was a physical reminder that betrayal has a ripple effect. Injury to one meant pain to all. Voldemort's tactic was chilling in its simplicity. He knew the Order relied on loyalty, on the belief that no one among them would turn. He also knew that not every member was a hero. "Harry is the boy's weak spot," Voldemort had once said. But he had discovered something far more effective. Harry, as allies, included men who were not only weak, but willing to bend. Mundungus, trembling and cornered, never imagined the magnitude of the information he leaked. To him, it was a way out of danger. To Voldemort, it was an open door into the heart of the Order. What makes this betrayal especially striking is how ordinary Mundungus was. He was not a mastermind, not a spy, not a cunning double agent planted by Voldemort. He was simply selfish. That very ordinariness is what made the betrayal devastating. The Order had always feared powerful enemies. They had never imagined they would be undone by incompetence and cowardice. This reflects a deeper theme in the saga. Evil does not always require brilliance. Sometimes it only needs a small crack in the wall. As Dumbledore once warned Harry, it is our choices that show what we truly are, and Mundungus made his choice in the shadow of fear. The fact that Voldemort chose to focus on someone like Fletcher shows how deeply he understood human nature. He knew he could not break someone like Kingsley Shacklebolt. He knew he could not deceive someone like McGonagall, but he could terrify Fletcher. He could press against his worst fears until the man collapsed under the weight. Voldemort always underestimated love, but he never underestimated fear. This was the moment where that distinction became deadly. Harry later realized that Voldemort had used a tactic the Order rarely considered. Instead of attacking the strongest, he exploited the weakest. Even more tragic is that Mundungus was not malicious. He did not wish Moody dead, nor did he want George mutilated. His betrayal was not born from hatred, it was born from a desire to escape. This is an uncomfortable truth for the Order, and for readers, sometimes the most catastrophic betrayals are caused not by villains, but by cowards. Voldemort merely nudged a trembling man in the direction of treachery, and Fletcher, who always slipped away when danger approached, did what he had spent a lifetime perfecting. He saved himself at the cost of others. The cost of that moment echoed far beyond the battle itself. The Order, once united under Dumbledore, his protection, now had to confront the reality of mistrust. The Seven Potters was meant to symbolize unity, but instead it revealed the cracks already forming. The grief over Moody's death, the panic over George's injury, and the fear that Voldemort was always one step ahead began to weigh on the group. As Harry sat at the burrow later that night, he could not ignore the feeling that everything was falling apart. The betrayal infected the atmosphere like a cold draught in an old house, quiet but undeniable. One of the most haunting aspects of the ambush is how Harry recognized Voldemort's voice cutting through the storm. "Kill the spare," Voldemort had once commanded during the Triwizard Tournament. Now he shouted orders again, his fury twisting through the air. The memory of the graveyard resurfaced in Harry's mind as he saw Voldemort gaining on him. Voldemort's mastery of fear, both in himself and in others, had grown sharper, colder, more calculated. Fletcher, his betrayal gave him the one advantage he had lacked for years: timing. The scene where Harry and Hagrid crash into the pond near the safe house highlights just how close Voldemort came to ending everything that night. Voldemort's killing curse narrowly missed Harry because of the wand's mysterious connection to his own. This was not luck, this was destiny intervening, but destiny could not undo what had been set in motion. Mundungus's panic had already reshaped the war. Moody was dead, the Order was shaken, and Voldemort had proven that he could infiltrate their plans without lifting a finger. In the days that followed, the Order pieced together the truth. It did not take long to realize that the leak came from within. Mundungus disappeared immediately after the ambush, which alone spoke volumes. It was Kingsley who first articulated the truth many suspected. Voldemort had learned about the plan from someone too frightened to resist, and in a quiet moment, Harry understood the full weight of it. The war was no longer fought merely with wands and spells. It was fought with trust, loyalty, and the fragility of human nature. What makes the betrayal of Mundungus Fletcher so unforgettable is not simply the consequences, it is what it revealed about heroism. True heroism, the kind Moody embodied, requires courage every moment, not only on the battlefield. By contrast, Mundungus, his life had been a chain of small avoidances, excuses, and escapes. His final act of betrayal was not a sudden fall from grace, it was the natural end of a life spent running. Voldemort understood that pattern. The Order did not. That misunderstanding became their downfall on that stormy night. And yet, despite the tragedy, the moment teaches one of the most essential truths in the Harry Potter world: evil wins not only through power, but through persuasion. Voldemort did not need loyalty, he only needed fear. The Order, in turn, relied on trust. Where Voldemort exploited weakness, the Order honored strength. The clash between these philosophies shaped the ambush, the war, and ultimately the destiny of every character touched by that night. Mundungus Fletcher may have been a small man, but his betrayal cast a shadow long enough for Voldemort to step through. Number 21, the attack on Weasley's Wizard Wheezes. The attack on Weasley's Wizard Wheezes stands in the shadows of the larger war, yet it represents one of Voldemort's most precise and deliberately orchestrated strikes. At a time when Harry Potter had become an elusive symbol, hidden, protected, and constantly moving, the Dark Lord turned his attention not to the boy himself, but to those whose light sustained him. Fred and George Weasley's shop had become a beacon in a city drowning in fear, laughter in dark times, colour in a world fading to grey. The attack on their haven was not merely an act of destruction, it was a message written in shattered glass and burned shelves. When Voldemort realized that Harry could not be reached through the usual channels, he sought a softer path, one lined with memories, emotions, and bonds the boy would never abandon. The Weasley twins, with their unbreakable cheer and defiance, embodied everything Voldemort despised. Their success in Diagon Alley was not just entrepreneurial, it was resistance. It was the audacity to smile while the world trembled. In Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, the shop is described as a riot of colour, a place where even war could not entirely smother joy. For Voldemort, such light was intolerable. The attack was planned in whispers inside Borgin and Berks, where Death Eaters often sought rare poisons and darker curiosities. Yaxley, known for his cold efficiency, understood the symbolic value of striking the Weasley family. He had studied their connections, the loyalty they shared, and the meaning their shop held for the public. The choice of Weasleys, Wizard Wheezes, was not random, it was the Dark Lord, as way of reminding the wizarding world that even hope had a price. While Harry remained hidden, rumours began to spread that the Ministry could not protect even those openly aligned with him. The Dark Mark had appeared above shops before, but never one associated with such youthful defiance. Fred and George had always been underestimated by Voldemort's followers. To them the twins were pranksters, entertainers, harmless annoyances at best. But the truth was far sharper. Their inventions had already been used in resistance efforts. The shield hats and protective cloaks were purchased quietly by Ministry workers, and members of the Order relied on Peruvian instant darkness powder and decoy detonators. Umbridge herself had been outwitted by their craftsmanship, a humiliation still discussed in dark circles. Any blow against the twins was a blow against a growing underground movement. The attack unfolded during a day when Diagon Alley was unusually crowded. According to eyewitnesses later interviewed by members of the Order, masked figures emerged as if from the fog itself. One witch described the moment as a sudden collapse of colour, as though the vibrancy of the street had drained away. Before anyone fully understood what was happening, the shop front exploded in a shower of flames tinted unnaturally green. Fred was thrown backward, shielded only by one of their own experimental defences. George, inside at the time, was forced to crawl through smoke that choked the bright displays they had arranged hours earlier. The magical fire was traced to a modified blasting curse, the kind only someone like Thorfinn Roll would wield. The destruction was swift, but the message endured. When the smoke cleared, the facade of the building was scorched, the windows cracked like spiderwebs. The once brilliant storefront sign flickered weakly, its cheerful colours now a ghost of what they had been. In the debris, workers from nearby shops found broken, skiving snack boxes and singed pygmy puff cages. The remnants were heartbreaking reminders that joy itself had been targeted. One wand maker who arrived moments later said, "It felt as though someone had tried to burn away our last piece of innocence." Although no one was killed, the emotional damage was profound. Fred, normally unshakable, stared for hours at the blackened remains of their shelves. George insisted on salvaging what he could, digging through the rubble to recover prototypes and half-finished jokes. Their resilience was remarkable, but the attack left a quiet scar that even their laughter could not fully conceal. As Harry later reflected, it was impossible to ignore how the war seeped into every corner of life. The twins' shop had long been a sanctuary, and now even sanctuaries were vulnerable. For Harry, the attack was a turning point he could not ignore. Though he had been warned repeatedly that Voldemort would come after those he cared about, the reality struck harder than he expected. The boy who had once walked freely through Diagon Alley felt a sense of crushing responsibility. In his absence, the world he loved had taken the blows meant for him. He recognized the cruelty of the strategy. Voldemort was forcing him to witness suffering from afar. The bitter truth was that hiding kept him alive but exposed everyone else. Voldemort's decision to attack indirectly mirrored the tactic he used when he sent Dementors after Harry and Dudley years earlier. He had always preferred psychological warfare over brute force when it suited him. Here, too, he sought not the bodies of his victims, but the erosion of morale. By targeting the Weasley twins, he attacked friendship, loyalty, and the spirit of rebellion itself. He demonstrated that even the brightest corners of the wizarding world were within his reach, a reminder that fear could spread faster than fire. Inside the ruined shop, members of the Order later discovered something chilling, a small fragment of parchment bearing the dark mark and a line written in a spidery hand. It read, "Light fades fastest where it burns too brightly." Whether or not Voldemort himself wrote it, the meaning was unmistakable. It was a warning to anyone who dared to inspire hope. Fred kept the parchment for months, not as a trophy, but as a reminder of what they were fighting. The twins rebuilt their shop, not fully, not perfectly, but defiantly, and in the process they proved that Voldemort had failed to extinguish their flame. Yet the emotional consequences spread far beyond Diagon Alley. Customers became wary. Parents stopped allowing their children to visit the shop, fearing they might be caught in another attack. Sales plummeted not because people stopped loving the twins' inventions, but because fear dictated their footsteps. A shop that once echoed with laughter now felt haunted. Every creak of a floorboard made George stiffen. Every flicker of light made Fred instinctively reach for a wand. Joy had become fragile, breakable. Harry learned about the attack through a coded message from Arthur Weasley. Though the elder Weasley attempted to soften the description, the weight of the words still pressed heavily on Harry. They are shaken, but whole. The shop will need rebuilding. They will not admit how close it was. The guilt Harry felt was unspoken but immense. The attack reinforced a truth he had tried to deny. Voldemort was not merely hunting him. The Dark Lord was dismantling his world piece by piece. The twins were not the only ones in danger. Anyone connected to Harry was now a target. The wizarding public reacted with a mixture of outrage and terror. Letters poured into the Daily Prophet, demanding stronger protection for Diagon Alley. Others whispered that anyone associated with Harry Potter was cursed, a dangerous notion that only fed Voldemort's strategy. The attack deepened divisions, frayed alliances, and stirred a fear that lingered long after the fire was extinguished. Even Ollivander, who rarely commented on public affairs, was overheard saying, "Wands can be mended, shops rebuilt, but fear leaves a longer scar." In the following weeks, the twins showed remarkable resilience. George, who had already endured losing an ear to Death Eater attack, refused to let the destruction define him. Fred, who often hid his worry behind humour, worked tirelessly to restore their displays. The rebuilding became a statement of defiance. Every shelf they repaired, every new product they released, was an act of rebellion. Their shop became not merely a business, but a symbol of endurance. "If we stop laughing," George said once, "then they've already won." It was a sentiment shared by many, though few could embody it as bravely as the twins. Perhaps the most striking aspect of the attack was how it revealed Voldemort's understanding of human nature. He knew that heroes rarely fall because of physical wounds; they break when their hearts are pierced. By striking the Weasley twins, he attempted to fracture Harry from within, but in doing so he unwittingly strengthened the bonds among those who resisted him. Fred and George's recovery became a quiet victory, a reminder that hope could survive even the darkest flames. Their shop, once merely a place of mischief, became a testament to courage. Even long after the war, the attack on Weasley's Wizardweezes is remembered not only as a moment of destruction, but as a defining example of Voldemort's twisted brilliance. It showed that cunning could be as deadly as any curse. It revealed the vulnerability of joy in a world ruled by fear. And it proved that heroes, though wounded, could rise again, not in grand battles, but in the slow, deliberate act of rebuilding what was almost lost. Number 22. Caro's Cruciatus Curse on Neville. When Hogwarts fell under the iron grip of the Caro siblings, the atmosphere of the castle changed more brutally than even the darkest rumours suggested. The ancient corridors that had once echoed with laughter, rushing footsteps, and the murmurs of midnight wanderings now felt like the stone ribs of a monstrous creature that had swallowed its students whole. In this suffocating environment, Neville Longbottom, once timid and often overlooked, stood out precisely because he refused to disappear into fear. As the months passed, his defiance became a quiet ember glowing in the dark, and that was enough for Amicus Caro to mark him as an example to be broken. Neville's transformation had begun long before the Caros set foot in Hogwarts. His role in Dumbledore's army, his victory in the Department of Mysteries, and the growing confidence that had come from mastering defensive spells all shaped a young man who would not yield. This was not the Neville who once trembled under Snape's sneer. But transformation did not shield him from cruelty. It only ensured he would be targeted. As Amicus took control of defense against the dark arts, twisted into a class on the dark arts themselves, the new regime looked for someone whose suffering could serve as a warning. Neville was perfect, brave, loyal, and utterly unwilling to fold. The Caros knew the mechanics of fear better than most. Voldemort's followers rarely improvised cruelty; they executed it like ritual. Sometimes, as one unnamed Death Eater once said in the books, "It's not the dying that matters, but the watching." Amicus fully embraced this philosophy. For him, pain was not just a punishment, it was a spectacle. And Neville, who dared to speak, dared to resist, dared to hope, was placed at the center of that spectacle. Each time he stood up, Amicus saw an opportunity to tighten his hold on the school. Neville's first experience with the Caro torture came after he openly refused to practice the Cruciatus Curse on younger students. The moment was recorded in grim memory by nearly everyone in the classroom. Amicus' face twisted not with rage, but satisfaction. He had been waiting for this defiance. With a flick of his wand and a deliberate slowness, he cast the curse that the books describe with chilling clarity. Itoiti, the Cruciatus Curse, causes unbearable pain. Neville collapsed, but he didn't scream, not the way Amicus wanted. And in that disobedience alone, the Caros found both frustration and fascination. What made Neville S suffering so strategically effective for the Carrows was not its physicality, but its timing. Amicus always struck when the tension in the castle reached a near-breaking point, when whispers of rebellion grew louder among the frightened students. He knew precisely when to demonstrate power. In one of the darkest weeks of that year, right before Easter, Neville had dismantled a system of tracking spells the Carrows placed in the Gryffindor common room. Amicus responded by summoning the entire class, forcing them to stand in a semicircle and dragging Neville forward as if presenting a sacrifice. The Carrow's voice was almost ceremonial when he hissed the incantation. The Cruciatus curse lifted Neville off his feet, and Amicus held it long enough for several students to look away, unable to endure the sight. That, in Amicus's eyes, was victory. Yet the astonishing part of these punishments was Neville's endurance. This was not the endurance of a hardened soldier. It was the endurance of someone who had seen suffering in his own family. His parents, Frank and Alice Longbottom, had been tortured into madness by Bellatrix Lestrange, Rodolphus Lestrange, Rabastan Lestrange, and Barty Crouch Jr. Neville had grown up with the echo of the Cruciatus curse in his blood. Somewhere deep inside he understood that pain was not the end of a story. That legacy hardened him. In Order of the Phoenix, the moment when Neville quietly says, "They never got better," showed a boy who had already been acquainted with a kind of grief most adults never experience. Amicus Carrow could not have known that the very history meant to weaken Neville was the one that made him unbreakable. The psychological dimension of these punishments was deliberate. The Carrows' true goal was not to punish Neville, it was to shape the rest of the student body. If they could make the bravest student crack, the logic went, then everyone else would lose hope. And there were moments when the atmosphere of dread seemed to work. Younger students trembled when Amicus entered a room. Hufflepuffs whispered in corners, Slytherins avoided eye contact, and Ravenclaws remained silent even when faced with blatant injustice. Neville, in their minds, became a symbol not only of resistance, but of the terrible cost of resistance. In a twisted way, Neville's torment achieved short-term results. Fear spread like a fog. For a time, fewer students dared to sabotage the Carrows' commands. Even the Room of Requirement, the secret refuge of Dumbledore's army, saw fewer visitors. Every new rumour about Neville's punishment, whether exaggerated or sanitized, served as a reminder that standing up came with consequences. Amicus exploited that fear with precision. When a student hesitated during a forced lesson on the dark arts, he would sneer, "Do you want to end up like Longbottom?" It became a refrain that seeped into nightmares. But the Carrows miscalculated something essential. Pain induces fear, but resilience inspires rebellion. The more Neville endured, the more his legend grew among the students. His name began to circulate, not with pity, but with admiration. Those who watched Amicus torture him understood that Neville was not simply resisting for himself. He was resisting for all of them. Luna Lovegood would later remark, "Neville's the one who has kept Dumbledore's army alive." The students who saw him fall under the Cruciatus curse returned to their rooms shaken, but they also returned changed. Each time he stood back up, the Carrows' power dimmed a little. By the time spring came, Neville's scars, emotional and physical, had become a map of rebellion, a guide that the other students followed. His refusal to be broken created an unspoken pact within the school. The Carrows did not realize how dangerous such symbolism could be. They believed they were crushing a leader when in reality they were forging one. As Seamus Finnegan later described, Neville had become the backbone of the resistance. His pain did not silence others, it gave them a voice. One of the most chilling episodes occurred when Amicus attempted to force Neville to confess the hiding place of DA members. When he refused, the Carrow paced before the class like a predator circling prey. He cast the Cruciatus curse again, longer and sharper this time, aiming to slice through Neville's willpower. Some students cried, others clenched their fists. Amicus saw despair where he wanted fear, and it fueled him. But Neville's trembling, battered body still refused to give him what he wanted. This was the moment when several students finally understood why Voldemort feared prophecy. Strength does not always roar. Sometimes it endures. Even professors under the Carrows saw the toll these punishments took. Minerva McGonagall, helpless to intervene directly, watched Neville from a distance with the quiet grief of someone witnessing history repeat itself. She had known Frank and Alice Longbottom. She had visited them in St. Mungo's. To see the same cruelty inflicted on their son was a haunting reminder that evil does not die with victory. It mutates. Neville's silent determination brought tears to her eyes when she later recalled it after the war. The moment when the Carrows' strategy began to collapse was subtle but real. Students started entering the room of requirement again. Seamus and Ginny Weasley orchestrated minor acts of sabotage. Messages started appearing on classroom walls. Dumbledore's army still recruiting. Amicus, convinced that torture had weakened morale, found the opposite unfolding. His fury grew, and his punishments became even more erratic. But the tide had already shifted. Neville's endurance had planted seeds stronger than any fear the Carrows could sow. The final Cruciatus incident that Neville endured before the Battle of Hogwarts reflected both the Carrows' desperation and their failure. Amicus cornered him in a corridor near the Charms classroom after discovering that a group of students had freed a first year from detention. He unleashed the curse without ceremony. The pain was intense enough that Neville nearly collapsed, but he held on to the wall and refused to fall. And in that stance, wounded yet upright, Amicus saw the truth. He had not broken Neville. He had forged him. When the rebellion erupted during the final battle, Neville's leadership became undeniable. He stood at the forefront, not because he sought glory, but because he had already suffered everything the enemy could possibly do to him. And the students who had once watched his torment now followed him without hesitation. The very torture that was meant to silence them had instead built an army. Amicus Carrow never understood that cruelty has limits. Voldemort himself admitted in Deathly Hallows, "You are a braver man than your father Neville." That line was not a compliment, it was an acknowledgement. Neville had endured the darkest weapon the Death Eaters possessed and emerged not shattered, but sharpened. The Carrows' near success lay not in physical pain, but in the momentary despair they seeded. Their failure lay in believing fear lasts longer than courage. In Neville's case, it never did. Number 23, The Trap at Malfoy Manor. The icy stillness of Malfoy Manor never felt accidental. Even before Harry, Ron, and Hermione were dragged across its threshold, the place radiated a kind of intentional darkness, as though every stone had been placed to enforce fear. After the chaos of breaking out of Gringotts on the back of a dragon, their unexpected capture brought a brutal reminder. The forces they were fighting were not merely violent, but calculating. The Death Eaters did not stumble upon luck. They laid snares, and this time Harry and his friends had flown directly into one. Bellatrix Lestrange's reaction upon seeing the trio reflected this unsettling precision. She sensed an opportunity, but more importantly, she sensed a threat. Her eyes narrowed not in aimless cruelty, but in recognition of something out of place, something that did not match the scene before her. The moment she caught sight of the sword of Gryffindor among their possessions, her fury became sharpened with purpose. "That sword is supposed to be in my vault at Gringotts," she shouted with terror rather than rage. Her fear of Voldemort's reaction meant she had to secure answers before he arrived, and that urgency shaped everything that followed. The manor functioned like a predatory creature. Its long corridors, locked rooms, and cold echoing chambers made it the perfect setting for strategic cruelty. Every Death Eater present, Lucius Malfoy, Narcissa Malfoy, Bellatrix Lestrange, and even the Snatchers, became moving parts of one coordinated trap. Their goal was simple: confirm the identities of their captives, secure the stolen item, and deliver the prisoners to Lord Voldemort, who was only a call away. It was not brute force, it was procedure. The heroes were not facing animalistic tormentors, but tacticians. Hermione became the prime target of that strategy. Bellatrix knew that Harry, Ron, and Hermione were inseparable, and she also knew Hermione was the most likely to break under pressure, not because she was weak, but because she carried the burden of knowledge. The moment Bellatrix isolated her, the atmosphere of the manor shifted. The violence inflicted upon Hermione was cruel, but it was not senseless. It was designed to extract truth, specifically confirmation that the sword was real. Bellatrix needed to know if her Gringotts vault had been compromised, because if it had, she risked Voldemort's wrath more than any of them. There was a chilling intelligence in Bellatrix's methods. She did not waste time on emotional torment. She focused on targeted fear. The decision to torture Hermione while the others listened helplessly was as much psychological warfare as it was interrogation. The screams rising through the floors were meant to break the entire group's resolve. Harry, imprisoned in the cellar, felt every cry as a personal failure. The narrative makes clear that Hermione was screaming again. The sound tore at Harry as he struggled helplessly. The Death Eaters were not only inflicting pain, they were weaponizing it. For Harry, the trap felt especially heavy because it mirrored one of Voldemort's patterns, exploiting emotional bonds. The Dark Lord had long recognized that Harry's compassion could be used against him, and now Bellatrix applied the same logic. By torturing Hermione, she ensured that Harry's mental state slipped from rational planning to frantic desperation. The odds shifted further out of balance with each passing moment, giving the villains more control. Bellatrix's plan was simple, and it was working. Break the brightest mind of the trio, destabilize the others, and present Voldemort with captives stripped of resistance. Ron Weasley, though trapped with Harry in the cellar, felt Hermione as suffering with raw panic. His reaction was not strategic, it was instinctive. Ron's emotional unraveling served the villains' purpose, because fear spread quickly in confined spaces. Even the tentative hope that Luna Lovegood, Dean Thomas, Ollivander, and Griphook gave them could not fully counter the dread swelling in the cellar. Each scream reinforced the Death Eater's psychological dominance. The manor became a closed system of fear, and no one inside it could think clearly except the villains orchestrating the torment. Meanwhile, above them, Bellatrix's interrogation intensified because she understood what was truly at stake. Inside her vault lay counterfeit treasures, and she needed to confirm the sword's authenticity before Voldemort learned of its disappearance. Hermione's agony was a means to an end. "Is it the real one? Is it?" Bellatrix shrieked, her voice rising with panic. The villain. As anxiety added a dangerous new dimension, she was terrified of her master. That fear made her more unpredictable and more efficient. The heroes found themselves not only outnumbered, but outmaneuvered by someone who had everything to lose. What makes this trap so disturbing is that Hermione resisted with astonishing strength, even as Bellatrix pressed deeper into deliberate cruelty. Yet the design of the trap meant that heroism could not win through sheer resilience. Bellatrix could continue indefinitely. Time itself was a weapon, and as long as the trio remained locked within the manor, their captors would inevitably break someone. The villain's strategy was built on inevitability. If torture did not succeed within minutes, then exhaustion would succeed within hours. It was a slow, tightening net. Griphook's presence in the cellar became a crucial element, not because he had power, but because he held knowledge. The goblin recognized the sword for what it truly was, and Harry realized that Bellatrix would stop only when someone confirmed or denied her suspicion. This placed the heroes in a deadly position. Telling the truth would condemn them, but lying too effectively could provoke further torture. The villains had cornered them psychologically. It was not a trap of chains or spells. It was a trap of impossible choices. In that darkness, where every moment pushed the trio closer to despair, something unexpected happened. A soft crack of apparition broke the cycle, small yet unmistakable. It signaled a shift in the balance, though neither Harry nor Ron dared believe it at first. The arrival of Dobby the house elf became the one element the villains had never anticipated. The Death Eaters believed themselves unchallenged inside the manor, protected by its enchantments and reputation. They did not consider that loyalty, courage, and a free elf as determination could penetrate their den of calculated cruelty. Dobby's courage disrupted the flawless trap with disarming simplicity. His presence alone was enough to fracture the villain's control. The manor, strategic advantage, relied on predictability, closed spaces, locked doors, terrified captives. Dobby broke all three. He freed Luna, Dean, and Ollivander. He weakened the guard structure. He provided Harry with a sliver of possibility, and with possibility came renewed clarity. For the first time since entering the manor, Harry could think strategically rather than reactively. The escape was chaotic, but it carried the unmistakable mark of a counter-strategy. Harry leveraged Bellatrix, using her panic about the sword to create a moment of distraction. He understood that her desperation not to disappoint Voldemort made her vulnerable. The same intelligence that formed the trap now became the crack that destroyed it. When Harry seized the chance to disarm Draco Malfoy, it symbolized more than a reclaimed wand. It became the moment the heroes shifted from prisoners to survivors. The success of the escape came at a devastating cost, and that cost revealed the final cruelty of the villains' strategy. As they apparated from the collapsing trap, Bellatrix hurled her knife with lethal precision. The blade struck Dobby, the one creature who had fought hardest for their freedom. The villains had not managed to deliver Harry to Voldemort, but they succeeded in striking a wound meant to linger. The Manners trap was not merely physical, it carried emotional aftershocks designed to haunt long after escape. The tragedy of Dobby's death underscores the depth of the villains' cunning. Even in defeat, they forced the heroes to suffer loss. The knife that pierced the elf symbolized something larger, the cruelty of a system built not only to capture but to scar. Harry's grief in that moment anchored the experience of Malfoy Manor as one of the darkest chapters of their journey. Here lies Dobby, a free elf. The inscription that would later mark his grave was not only a farewell, it was a quiet condemnation of the villains' deliberate malice. In the end, Malfoy Manor stands as the clearest example of a moment when the villains outsmarted the heroes. They identified their captives, exploited their weaknesses, used targeted psychological warfare, and deployed torture with strategic intent. They were one step away from delivering Harry to Voldemort, and only the intervention of an unlikely ally saved him. The trap did not fail because it was flawed. It failed because Dobby acted with a kind of selfless bravery that the Death Eaters could neither predict nor understand. Their strategy was formidable, but it lacked the one ingredient that ultimately decided the outcome: love stronger than fear. Number 24. The takeover of the Daily Prophet. When the Dark Lord decided to wage war, not with curses but with fear, the first stroke of his invisible wand fell not on battlefields but on printing presses. The Daily Prophet, once a bustling hub of reporters arguing over headlines and chasing interviews, became the quietest building in Diagon Alley the moment the ministry fell. Quill by quill, desk by desk, it turned into a machine that printed terror disguised as truth. The takeover was not sudden, it was surgical. Voldemort understood that heroes win battles, but villains win silence, and by twisting the prophet into his personal mouthpiece, he robbed the wizarding world of its most important weapon, the freedom to know. The reporters who once wrote about Quidditch scores and cauldron shortages found themselves forced to craft articles labeling Harry Potter as undesirable number 1. There had been resistance at first, especially from veteran journalist Barnabas Cuff, whose quill had been respected for decades. But threats materialized like shadows behind every writer's chair, and soon even the bravest among them fell quiet. Many remembered the day Dolores Umbridge swept into the office accompanied by masked wizards, her pink smile more chilling than any skull-shaped cloud. She carried an official decree stamped with the ministry seal, now nothing more than decorative proof that the Dark Lord did not need to sign his own orders. The Prophet's front page changed overnight. Dumbledore, once admired as the world's greatest defender against darkness, was painted as a deceiver who had manipulated a naive orphan for political gain. The article claimed he had raised Harry like a guillotine weapon rather than a boy. Rumours that Harry had murdered Cedric Diggory resurfaced, now printed in bold letters as fact. The aim was not to convince but to exhaust the reader until doubt became habit. Voldemort did not need total belief. He needed enough hesitation so that no one acted. This was the kind of strategy heroes rarely foresee because it does not duel, it infects. The most insidious act was the imposition of the taboo. It hung over the wizarding world like an invisible net, delicate and deadly. Voldemort chose the name Harry Potter purposefully, knowing it was spoken daily in worry, anger, or love. Placing the taboo on it meant transforming a simple sound into a trigger for capture. Anyone who uttered it summoned snatchers, bounty hunters who crawled through the wreck of Britain like vultures searching for the injured. A single whisper could betray an entire household. Wizards who had once proudly displayed Harry as photographed now forced themselves to think of him only as the boy, as if language itself had become cursed. One of the most haunting examples reached readers years later when families recounted the night the Cattermoles were dragged from their home. Mary Cattermole, already hunted for being Muggle-born, had spoken Harry, his name, while trying to reassure her daughter. Within minutes, snatchers burst through the door, following the trail left by the taboo. Her husband Reginald tried to defend them, but the snatchers only laughed, claiming the ministry had given them evidence of treason. The Cattermoles survived, but they later said that the terror came not from the attack, but from realizing that their own affection for Harry had endangered them. What Voldemort achieved through the prophet was not mere censorship, it was the erasure of shared reality. The newspaper insisted that Hogwarts was thriving under Severus Snape's noble leadership, while in truth the Carrows turned classrooms into torture chambers. It claimed that Muggle-borns willingly registered for interrogation, while entire families vanished without a trace. The lie was too large to argue with. If anyone attempted to speak openly, they risked not only arrest, but the suspicion of their neighbours. The Dark Lord had made fear communal, silence became patriotic. Even the wording of the prophet's articles carried cold precision. One issue described Harry as armed, dangerous, and seeking to destabilize the stability the ministry has restored. The irony was so sharp that contemporary readers later admitted feeling physically ill when revisiting the archives. Hermione Granger, reflecting on those months, recalled that the most terrifying line she ever read was not a threat, but a reassurance printed at the bottom of the prophet's November edition: "Your ministry protects you." The promise was hollow, and yet the exact emptiness of it was what made it effective. A critical turning point came when Xenophilius Lovegood attempted to resist. Refusing to bow to propaganda, he printed the now famous issue of the Quibbler naming Harry as the true chosen one. The prophet retaliated instantly. Within days, the front page declared Xenophilius a dangerous extremist cooperating with known criminals. This accusation was followed by the kidnapping of Luna Lovegood, used as leverage to force him into silence. The event illustrated Voldemort's precision. He allowed small acts of rebellion only to crush them publicly, turning each punishment into a warning. Readers of the prophet began to notice unnatural changes. Photographs no longer moved energetically. The witches and wizards featured in them looked subdued, as though someone had ordered them to remain still. This was not a technical issue, but the consequence of enchantments placed on the newsroom. Spells were cast to prevent sympathetic portrayals of the hunted. The printing ink was cursed so that any attempt to write Harry's name without authorization caused the quill to snap. These details were small compared to the chaos outside, yet they were the gears that turned the machine of manipulation. Voldemort's strategy worked so effectively because it tapped into a truth the wizarding world had long ignored. For decades, many relied on the prophet as unquestioned authority. When it turned corrupt, the trust remained, even if eroded. A veteran aura later confessed that he had hesitated to resist because he feared the prophet would portray him as disloyal. He said he still remembered the line printed after Dumbledore's death. Order of the Phoenix. Members continue to spread dangerous conspiracy theories. The phrase echoed in his mind long after the war ended. In those months, the prophet repeated a single message so relentlessly that it began to reshape the emotional landscape of Britain. Harry Potter endangers your children. Parents barred their children from mentioning him. Some burned old issues of the Quibbler carrying his photograph. At the Burrow, even Arthur Weasley admitted feeling a moment of fear when he caught himself saying, "Harry," his name aloud. The taboo had worked its way beneath logic, making wizards question the safety of their own thoughts. The system reached its darkest point when the Snatchers captured Ted Tonks, the father of Nymphadora Tonks. His crime was simple. A neighbor heard him muttering Harry, his name in frustration, after reading a false prophet headline. The taboo activated instantly, and he was caught within the hour. His family never saw him again. His fate circulated in whispers, further strengthening the Dark Lord's plan. Voldemort did not need to kill millions. A handful of strategic vanishings cultivated obedience faster than any law. The prophet also targeted public morale by attacking Hermione Granger and Ron Weasley. One article accused Hermione of using enchantments to seduce Harry in pursuit of political power, a claim so absurd that she nearly tore the issue apart when she saw it. Yet the goal was never truth, it was humiliation. Another issue painted Ron as a deserter, incapable of loyalty even to his own friends. These stories chipped at the trio's legend, making it easier for the public to believe that their disappearance signaled guilt rather than pursuit. During these months of controlled narrative, the quote most repeated across the prophet's pages was one lifted from a corrupted ministry statement: "The chosen one has chosen chaos." For many, that sentence crystallized the atmosphere of the time. It blurred responsibility, making war feel like something Harry had brought upon them personally. Later, when historians attempted to analyze public reactions, they discovered that the phrase had reduced the number of open supporters speaking Harry, his name by nearly 90%. The prophet's power only collapsed when Voldemort fell, but its shadow lingered long afterward. Former readers described needing months to trust printed words again. Even as they celebrated Harry's victory, the echo of propaganda remained. They remembered the headlines, the fear, the taboo, and the chilling realization that the Dark Lord's most effective weapon had not been the killing curse, but the quiet reshaping of truth. The war scars on the mind proved deeper than those on the body. When wizards revisited the prophet archives years later, they found a line that had once slipped past readers unnoticed, printed in the middle of an article, smearing the Order of the Phoenix. It read, "He who controls the story controls the war." Few realized then that Voldemort himself had authored it. Number 25. Death Eaters among the teachers. In the wake of the ministry's downfall, Hogwarts, once a symbol of safety and wisdom, became a dark fortress, a place where fear hung in every hallway, and the familiar sense of magic and wonder was replaced by the heavy air of oppression. The magical school, once a sanctuary for all students, was transformed into a breeding ground for darkness. Under the tight grip of Lord Voldemort's forces, the school became more than just a symbol of the wizarding world. It was a weapon wielded to reshape the future of magic. The transition from an institution of learning to one of fear began with the appointment of new teachers, Alecto and Amicus Caro, two figures whose very presence would forever change the atmosphere at Hogwarts. These siblings were not just any ordinary teachers, they were loyal followers of Voldemort, known for their sadistic tendencies and a deep, unyielding commitment to the Dark Lord's ideals. They were far from the kind-hearted professors the students had come to know. The Caros were cruel and cunning, using their positions to manipulate the students in ways that reached beyond simple punishment. They introduced a twisted version of education, one where cruelty was not only tolerated but encouraged, where pain and fear became the tools for learning. Alecto Caro, as the new professor of Muggle Studies, used her classes not to educate but to propagate hate and fear. She glorified the oppression of Muggles, spreading lies and twisting history to create an entire generation of students who viewed Muggles as subhuman, as lesser beings. Her lessons were not focused on the history of Muggles or their contributions to the magical world. Instead, they were designed to instill the ideology that Muggles were inferior, that they deserved to be controlled and exploited. Her method was effective, creating a division within the school that was hard to ignore. Students who once studied side by side now found themselves looking over their shoulders, questioning who could be trusted as the poisonous ideology spread like wildfire. Her brother, Amicus Caro, took over the position of defense against the dark arts, but his version of the subject was far removed from the traditional curriculum. Rather than teaching students how to protect themselves, he taught them how to hurt. His lessons became an unrelenting parade of cruelty. He didn't just teach students the unforgivable curses, he demonstrated them. Students were forced to endure the torture of the Cruciatus curse, not in some theoretical, controlled environment, but as part of their lessons. It was a display of power, of control, designed not to teach, but to break their spirits. For Amicus, the classroom was a battleground, and the students were nothing more than pawns in a twisted game. What made this situation so terrifying was not just the presence of these two figures, but the way in which Voldemort had maneuvered to take control of the very heart of magical education. He didn't need to destroy Hogwarts, he simply needed to corrupt it from the inside out. By turning the school into a place of fear, Voldemort ensured that a new generation of wizards and witches would grow up without a moral compass, devoid of the values that once made them defenders of justice and equality. Hogwarts, which had once been a place that instilled hope and courage in the hearts of its students, now became a factory of darkness where young minds were molded to serve the Dark Lord's cause. For the heroes, Harry, Ron, and Hermione, the situation was dire. They had been cast out of Hogwarts, forced to flee when the Caros' reign of terror was fully established. The school that had once been their home, where they had learned about friendship, loyalty, and courage, was now an enemy stronghold. The trio, though capable and determined, had to operate from the shadows. They could no longer walk freely through the halls, no longer count on the support of their friends and professors. They had to fight a different kind of battle now, one that required secrecy, cunning, and above all, a willingness to resist, even in the face of overwhelming odds. The Caros were more than just simple henchmen of Voldemort. They were tools of a deeper, more insidious strategy. Voldemort understood that the key to his long-term success lay in the manipulation of the next generation of witches and wizards. He knew that if he could infiltrate the very system that educated and raised these young minds, he could create a new breed of followers, ones who would serve him not out of fear, but because they had been taught to believe in his cause. The Carrows were the perfect candidates for this task. They were not just loyal to Voldemort, they were passionate about spreading his dark teachings. Their sadism was not merely a reflection of their personalities, it was a deliberate strategy to break down the will of the students, to bend them to the will of their dark master. In this twisted new version of Hogwarts, the very idea of justice was distorted. The Carrows, as representatives of Voldemort's rule, did not just punish disobedience, they created an environment where students were constantly under threat, where the very concept of right and wrong became fluid and dependent on the whims of those in power. Students who resisted were punished severely, not just through physical means, but through emotional and psychological torment. Fear became a constant companion for every student at Hogwarts, as the lines between what was acceptable and what was not became increasingly blurred. The heroes' attempt to fight back was hampered not only by the physical threats of the Carrows and their fellow Death Eaters, but also by the ideological battle that was being waged. Voldemort's strategy was so much more than just a matter of force. It was a matter of manipulating the very way people thought, of turning the school's values against itself. By controlling the education system, Voldemort sought to create a future where his ideology would be unquestioned, where the next generation of wizards would not just obey him out of fear, but out of conviction. In their attempts to fight from the shadows, Harry, Ron, and Hermione found themselves facing a world that had shifted beneath their feet. The school they had once known, the place that had given them the tools to fight against evil, had become a twisted reflection of itself. They no longer had the privilege of being students in a place where learning was a means of enlightenment. They were now rebels in a place that sought to suppress and control knowledge. The trio could not fight this battle with brute force alone. They had to outthink and outmaneuver their enemies, relying on the skills they had learned over the years, from the importance of loyalty to the need for stealth and clever planning. The loss of Hogwarts to Voldemort's forces was a significant blow to the Resistance. It wasn't just the physical occupation of the school, it was the loss of a symbol. Hogwarts had always represented hope, freedom, and the possibility of a better future. Its fall signified the depth of Voldemort's power, and it made the fight seem even more hopeless. Yet despite the overwhelming odds, Harry and his friends continued to resist. They knew that the battle was far from over, and that even in the darkest of times, hope could be found in the smallest acts of rebellion. In the end, the Carrows were but pawns in a larger game. Their cruelty was a symptom of the larger war being fought within the wizarding world, a war not just of power, but of ideologies. Voldemort's ability to turn Hogwarts into a factory of fear was a reminder of the fragility of freedom and justice, and how easily they could be corrupted when those in power used education as a tool to further their own dark agendas. But the heroes, though cast out and forced to fight from the shadows, proved that no amount of darkness could ever extinguish the light of hope completely. Their story was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, even in the face of overwhelming evil. Number 26. Grindelwald and the lie about the Elder Wand. In the depths of the wizarding world, the struggle between good and evil was never simple. Often the lines between heroism and villainy blurred. But few moments in J.K. Rowling's saga are as masterfully crafted as the subtle manipulation at the hands of Gellert Grindelwald in Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows. Although imprisoned in Nurmengard, Grindelwald's influence extended far beyond the walls of his cell, playing a pivotal role in the dark strategy that led to the ultimate downfall of Lord Voldemort. This moment was one where the forces of evil did not just clash, but were manipulated against each other, a game of deceit orchestrated by one dark wizard to lead the other down a false path. When Voldemort, in his singular quest for power, sought Grindelwald's knowledge about the Deathly Hallows, he believed that he was on the verge of uncovering a crucial piece of his puzzle, the Elder Wand. Grindelwald, who had once wielded this wand with terrifying power, was now at the mercy of his rival. Yet the cunning nature of Grindelwald's mind, ever calculating, was not subdued by his imprisonment. When Voldemort visited him, the Dark Lord believed he would extract the truth from the former Dark Wizard, a truth that would make him even more invincible. However, Grindelwald had other plans. Knowing full well that Voldemort had no idea where the Elder Wand truly was, Grindelwald spun a lie so devastatingly clever that it not only misled Voldemort, but also played into his deepest weaknesses. He lied about the location of the wand, telling Voldemort that it was not in his possession and never had been. This was a lie that could have no immediate benefit for Grindelwald. He had nothing to gain from deceiving Voldemort, but the consequences of this lie were far-reaching. What Grindelwald understood, what Voldemort, in his arrogance, failed to grasp, was the danger of leading the Dark Lord into making a fatal mistake. Voldemort's quest for the Elder Wand had consumed him for years. His obsession with conquering death and securing his place as the supreme ruler of the wizarding world had already twisted his mind beyond redemption. The search for the wand had taken him on a journey that involved countless murders and manipulations, but at this critical moment, it was Grindelwald's subtle act of deception that sent Voldemort further down the wrong path. The Dark Lord, now furious and desperate, sought the wand at all costs, following the false lead that Grindelwald had planted. Grindelwald, despite his imprisonment, saw the long game. He understood Voldemort's personality, his arrogance, and his overwhelming desire for power. By feeding Voldemort a lie, Grindelwald manipulated the very trait that would lead to the Dark Lord as downfall, his inability to trust others and his obsession with control. Voldemort, in his ignorance, assumed that the Elder Wand was not with Grindelwald but with someone else entirely, a person he would soon meet in his twisted hunt for power. This deception worked on many levels. First, it diverted Voldemort's attention from the truth. Grindelwald knew that Voldemort was a master of manipulation himself, but the Dark Lord had one fatal flaw. He believed that everyone was beneath him, and no one, not even his allies, could ever truly deceive him. When Grindelwald lied to Voldemort, he relied on this arrogance. He knew Voldemort would never question the lie. He would simply take it at face value and act on it. The brilliance of Grindelwald's strategy lay in the fact that it was a complete dead end. Voldemort's obsession with the Elder Wand led him to hunt for it in the wrong places. His quest for the wand would eventually lead him to the true owner, but not in the way he anticipated. The path Grindelwald set him on ensured that Voldemort would fail, not because he was incapable, but because he had been set up to fall victim to his own overconfidence. By lying about the wand's location, Grindelwald had manipulated the greatest dark wizard to ever live into playing directly into his hands. It is also crucial to recognize that Grindelwald's lie was a deliberate act of self-preservation, even in his downfall. While Grindelwald had been defeated by Dumbledore and imprisoned, he was not entirely powerless. This was not a move of someone who had given up. It was a final, clever act of defiance against the dark forces that had risen. Grindelwald knew that if Voldemort found the Elder Wand and used it in his bid for power, the repercussions would be catastrophic not only for the wizarding world, but for the entire balance of the magical realm. So, Grindelwald's manipulation served as an ultimate act of resistance. It was a chess move that, even from behind bars, ensured that Voldemort would not rise to the level of invincibility he sought. This manipulation was the height of Grindelwald's strategic thinking. He had been outwitted by Dumbledore, imprisoned and seemingly defeated, but in the long run, it was Grindelwald who set the stage for Voldemort's destruction. He knew that Voldemort's greatest weakness was not just his fear of death, but his inability to recognize the cleverness of others. Grindelwald, like Dumbledore, saw that Voldemort's hubris would be his undoing. His lie was not a small mistake. It was a pivotal turning point in the battle between dark and light. Voldemort's obsession with the Elder Wand, fed by Grindelwald's lie, would ultimately lead him to his demise. He would never have made the critical error that led to his death if he had not been misled into believing that the wand could be found through force and violence. Grindelwald's deception was the key to setting Voldemort on the path of self-destruction. The Elder Wand, in the end, proved to be the instrument of Voldemort's defeat, not because of its power, but because Voldemort was too blind to understand its true nature. In the final analysis, Grindelwald's actions serve as a testament to the intricacies of manipulation in the wizarding world. A single lie, when wielded by a mind as sharp as his, could change the course of events in a way that even the greatest dark wizard could not anticipate. In the world of Harry Potter, where dark magic and light are constantly at war, the deception that Grindelwald employed became one of the most significant and underestimated moments in the history of the fight for the soul of the wizarding world. Grindelwald's manipulative genius lies in the fact that he was not seeking to outwit the heroes, but rather his fellow dark wizard. Voldemort's obsession with control and his certainty in his own superiority made him an easy target for this kind of deceit. It was a reminder that even the most powerful are vulnerable, and sometimes it is not the strength of one's magic that determines victory, but the subtlety of one's mind.